August 1944. The summer sun was beating down on the hedgerows of Normandy, but the real heat was coming from the exhaust pipes of thousands of American tanks. To the world watching on newsreels, the war looked like it was practically over. The Allies had broken out of the beachheads. General George S. Patton's Third Army was tearing across France at a speed that defied logic. They weren't just advancing, they were sprinting. In just 2 weeks, they had liberated Paris and were racing toward the German border. The retreat of the Wehrmacht had turned into a rout. German soldiers were surrendering in droves, unable to run fast enough to escape the relentless steel tracks of the Shermans. But inside the Allied command tents, the mood was not one of celebration. It was panic. This was the Blitzkrieg paradox. The Allies were winning too fast. Before the invasion of D-Day, Allied planners had spent months calculating the logistics of liberation. They had built a schedule based on a slow, methodical advance, mile by bloody mile. They estimated that by D-Day plus 90, their armies would reach the Seine River. Patton reached the Seine on D-Day plus 79. He didn't stop there, he kept going. The planners had assumed the armies would pause to regroup, allowing supply lines to catch up. Patton didn't pause. He famously yelled at his chaotic supply officers, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks have got to have gas." The problem was simple physics. A Sherman tank consumes roughly 1.3 gallons of fuel for every mile it travels. An armored division on the move burns through 100,000 gallons of gasoline a day. And right now, every drop of that gasoline was still sitting on the beaches of Normandy, 300 miles behind the front lines. To make matters worse, the Allies were victims of their own success. In the weeks leading up to D-Day, Allied bombers had systematically destroyed the French railway network to prevent the Germans from sending reinforcements to the coast. It worked perfectly. But now, with the Germans retreating, the Allies needed those trains to move supplies. They looked at the maps and saw only twisted metal and bombed-out bridges. The railways were dead. On the other side of the line, the German generals were watching. Field Marshal Walter Model, known as Hitler's fireman, looked at the reports of Patton's speed. He stopped panicking and started doing math. The German high command knew the limits of logistics better than anyone. They had lost at Stalingrad because they outran their supply lines. They looked at the distance from Normandy to the German border. They calculated the fuel consumption of an American army, and they laughed. "Let them come," the German staff officers whispered. "They are driving into a trap of their own making." They knew that at any moment, the American juggernaut would sputter and die. A tank without fuel is just a useless 30-ton pillbox. If Patton ran out of gas in the middle of France, the retreating German panzer divisions could turn around, reorganize, and slaughter the immobilized Americans. The greatest generation was in danger of suffering the greatest defeat in history simply because they drove too fast. By the last week of August, the crisis hit. Forward units of the Third Army began to radio back, tanks dry, requesting fuel immediately. Patton was furious. He was reportedly so desperate that he sent officers to hijack fuel trucks intended for the First Army, holding the drivers at gunpoint to steal their gasoline. But thievery wasn't a strategy. The advance was grinding to a halt. The engines were cutting out. The silence on the battlefield was terrifying. General Dwight Eisenhower faced a nightmare choice. He could order a general halt, allowing the Germans to rebuild their West Wall defenses and dragging the war into 1945. Or he could find a way to move millions of gallons of gasoline, thousands of tons of ammunition, and rations for 2 million men across 300 miles of broken country, without trains, without ports, and without time. The Allies needed a miracle. They didn't need a strategy, they needed a truck. Thousands of them, and they needed them yesterday. The paradox of speed had almost lost them the war. Now, the only thing that could save them was a group of men the Army had largely ignored, segregated, and underestimated. The call went out. The Red Ball Express was about to be born. The meeting that saved the Allied advance did not happen in a grand palace in London or Washington. It happened in a cramped, smoke-filled tent in Normandy, smelling of wet canvas and stale coffee. It was August 24th, 1944. The situation was catastrophic. General Patton's tanks were sitting idle near the Seine, their fuel tanks dry. The entire momentum of the war was about to collapse because the supply lines had snapped. Colonel Loren Albert Ayers, a man known for his bulldog demeanor and a voice that could strip paint off a Jeep, looked at the map. The railways were bombed into oblivion. The ports were clogged. There was only one option left: the roads. The plan Ayers and his team sketched out in a frantic 36-hour marathon was not a military strategy. It was an act of logistical desperation. They proposed a loop, a massive one-way conveyor belt of asphalt. It was designed like a giant circulatory system. 2 parallel routes were chosen, stretching from the supply depots at Saint-Lô to the forward dumps at Chartres, just outside Paris. The northern route would be exclusively for outbound traffic, trucks loaded heavy with ammunition, fuel, and rations. The southern route was for the return trip, empty trucks racing back to reload. But a road is useless without vehicles. The Army had plenty of trucks, but they were scattered across hundreds of different units: artillery, anti-aircraft, engineering, and medical corps. A ruthless order went out: strip them. Commanders of non-infantry units woke up to find their transport being commandeered. If a vehicle had 6 wheels and an engine, it was seized. Anti-aircraft battalions were left stationary as their 2.5-ton Jimmy trucks were driven away. In a matter of days, the Army cobbled together a fleet of nearly 6,000 vehicles. To mark the route, the engineers raided the paint lockers. They couldn't make standard metal signs fast enough, so they used cardboard rations boxes hammered onto trees and telephone poles. On them, they painted a simple symbol: a red circle. In railway slang, Red Ball meant high-priority freight, the train that skipped stops to get the mail or perishable fruit to the city. Now, it meant life or death. Civilian traffic was banned. Any French farmer with a horse cart or American Jeep caught on the Red Ball route without a red disc on their bumper was pushed into the ditch. The military police were given strict orders: nothing stops the Red Ball. The rules were rigid. Convoys were to travel in packets of 5 trucks. They were to maintain a 60-yard interval to minimize damage from air attacks. The speed limit was set to a strict 25 miles per hour to save tires and engines. But war doesn't follow speed limits. As the first engines roared to life on August 25th, the theory of the controlled loop collided with the reality of urgent need. The demand from the front was insatiable. Patton didn't want 25 miles per hour. He wanted gas now. The drivers, thousands of them, hurriedly pulled from their units, knew the stakes. They weren't just driving, they were feeding the beast. Almost immediately, The governors, devices installed on carburetors to limit speed, began to mysteriously fall off. The 25-mile-per-hour limit became a suggestion, then a joke. Down the long, dusty French roads, the Red Ball Express began to roll. It wasn't a trickle of supplies, it was a roaring river of steel. At its peak, a truck would pass any given point on the route every 20 seconds, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Headlights were taped over to leave only cat-eye slits to avoid attracting German night fighters. The drivers drove by the glow of the taillights in front of them, fighting exhaustion that made the trees look like monsters. The gamble was massive. The trucks were being run into the ground. The tires were shredding. But as the first convoy rolled into the dump at Chartres, carrying tons of precious gasoline, the cheers of the tank crews drowned out the engines. The loop was closed. The impossible machine was running. And the Germans, who laughed at the idea of supplying an army by truck, stopped laughing and started digging in. The Americans had just invented a new way to wage war. If you looked at the newsreels of the liberation of Paris in August 1944, you saw white faces. You saw smiling GIs throwing chocolate to children, waving from tanks and marching down the Champs-Élysées. But the men who made that parade possible, the men who brought the gas for the tanks and the bullets for the rifles, were almost entirely invisible to the cameras. In 1944, the United States Army was fighting a war against Nazi racism with a segregated army. African American soldiers were systematically barred from combat units. The military leadership, steeped in the prejudices of the time, believed that black men lacked the courage or the intelligence to fight on the front lines. Instead, they were relegated to service units, the quartermaster corps, the engineers, and the truck companies. When the call went out for the Red Ball Express, these were the men who answered. Over 75% of the drivers on the Red Ball route were African American. They were given a task that was theoretically rear echelon work. In reality, it was a suicide run. A Red Ball driver wasn't just a chauffeur. He was a man wrestling a 2.5-ton GMC, a Jimmy, loaded with high explosives or thousands of gallons of volatile aviation fuel. He was driving down roads that had been mined by retreating Germans. He was driving through French villages where snipers were still hiding in church steeples. And he was doing it without heavy weapons, usually armed only with a grand determination and a flimsy M1 carbine. The conditions were inhumane. The Army needed supplies 24 hours a day. That meant the drivers drove until they literally passed out. "We drove until we couldn't see," one veteran recalled, "and then we drove some more." The standard shift was supposed to be reasonable, but in the chaos of the breakout, drivers often stayed behind the wheel for 36 to 48 hours at a stretch. They developed a terrifying condition they called the 1,000-yard stare. The vibration of the steering wheel numbed their hands. The diesel fumes choked their lungs. At night, it was worse. To avoid attracting German aircraft, they drove with cat-eye blackout lights, tiny slits of light that illuminated barely 10 feet of road in front of them. Staring at the white taillights of the truck ahead for hours induced hypnosis. Drivers would hallucinate. They saw German tanks that weren't there. They saw bridges that didn't exist. They swerved to avoid phantom children in the road, only to wake up in a ditch with a truck full of artillery shells tipped over. And yet, they didn't slow down. In fact, they sped up. The trucks came from the factory with governors, mechanical devices on the carburetor that limited speed to 25 miles per hour to save the engine. The Red Ball drivers, knowing that Patton's tanks were dying of thirst, became expert mechanics. They stripped the governors off. Suddenly, the convoy wasn't crawling, it was flying. These massive columns of trucks were tearing through French towns at 60 miles per hour, tires screaming, engines roaring. When military police tried to ticket them for speeding, the drivers would simply shout, "General Patton sent me," and keep driving. The irony was bitter. In the villages they passed, French civilians treated the black drivers as liberators. They rushed out with wine and flowers, kissing their cheeks, seeing only Americans who had come to save them. But when they returned to their depots, these same heroes were often refused service in white-only mess halls or harassed by white MPs who resented their freedom of movement. They were fighting two wars. One was against Hitler, and the other was for the double V, victory abroad and victory at home against racism. Despite the exhaustion and the discrimination, their performance was flawless. In 83 days, they delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies. They kept the Third Army alive. General Patton, a man not known for his progressive views on race, famously looked at a convoy of black drivers arriving at his headquarters with vital fuel. He didn't see color that day. He saw salvation. "I don't care what color you are, as long as you go up there and kill those Kraut sons of bitches," he reportedly said. The Red Ball Express proved the lie of segregation. When the pressure was highest, when the fate of the free world rested on a steering wheel, the men the Army had tried to hide became the most essential soldiers in Europe. They didn't just drive the trucks, they drove the victory. Tout suite. In French, it means immediately. In the mouth of thousands of exhausted American truck drivers in the late summer of 1944, it became tout suite. It was the motto of the Red Ball Express, but it was also a curse, because tout suite meant that nothing, absolutely nothing, was allowed to stop the movement of supplies. By September 1944, the Red Ball route had turned into a linear city of noise, dust, and danger. The carefully planned one-way loop that the logistical geniuses had drawn on maps had disintegrated into a chaotic free-for-all. It was the Wild West on wheels. The roads of France were never designed for this. They were narrow, winding country lanes meant for farm carts and bicycles, not for a relentless bumper-to-bumper snake of 2.5-ton GMC 6x6 trucks carrying 105mm howitzer shells and aviation fuel. The asphalt crumbled under the weight. The dust was so thick that drivers wore goggles and wrapped wet bandanas around their faces just to breathe. In the rain, the roads turned into a slurry of mud that could swallow a Jeep whole. But the real chaos wasn't the road conditions. It was the sheer desperation of the armies they were feeding. General George S. Patton's Third Army was advancing so fast that they were literally running off the map. His tanks were thirsty beasts, and Patton was not a man who accepted no as an answer. As the supply situation grew critical, the discipline of the distribution system collapsed. It began with Patton's Pirates. Normally, supplies were supposed to be delivered to central depots, cataloged, and then distributed. But Patton didn't have time for paperwork. He sent out raiding parties. Majors and colonels from the Third Army would drive jeeps to the crossroads of the Red Ball route, looking for fuel trucks designated for the First Army or the 9th Air Force. When they spotted a convoy carrying gasoline, they would pull it over. Sometimes they used authority. Sometimes they used bribes of captured German Lugers or champagne. And sometimes they simply used guns. There are verified reports of Patton's officers hijacking entire convoys at gunpoint. "Congratulations, soldier," they would tell the terrified driver. "You just transferred to the Third Army. Follow me." The drivers, often just happy to be relieved of their volatile cargo, would shrug and turn their steering wheels toward Patton's sector. The chaos extended to the maintenance of the trucks themselves. The vehicles were being driven into the ground. A Jimmy truck was a sturdy machine, but it wasn't built to run 20 hours a day at 50 miles per hour with double its rated payload. Tires were the first casualty. The heat generated by the friction of the speeding convoys caused the rubber to blister and blow out. The roadside became a graveyard of rubber. At the peak of the operation, the Red Ball Express was burning through 40,000 tires a month. If a truck broke down, there was no time for a tow. The rule of tout suite was absolute. If a truck stalled in the middle of the road, the truck behind it wouldn't stop to help. It would gently bump the stalled vehicle, pushing it onto the soft shoulder or into a ditch, and keep going. Repair crews, the unsung mechanics of the ordnance department, roamed the route in wreckers like vultures. They would find the abandoned trucks, swap out engines or axles right there in the mud, and put them back into the line. The danger wasn't just mechanical, it was lethal. The Luftwaffe, though weakened, still prowled the skies. German fighters would swoop down on the defenseless convoys, strafing the long lines of trucks. A single tracer bullet into a truck carrying 500 gallons of gasoline didn't just destroy the vehicle, it vaporized the driver and created a crater in the road that halted traffic for hours. And then there were the landmines. As the Germans retreated, they mined the road shoulders. Exhausted drivers who pulled over to take a leak or change a tire often triggered mines that had been left behind days earlier. Despite the hijacking, the blowouts, the strafing, and the sheer exhaustion, the tout suite system worked. It was messy, inefficient, and wasteful, but it was fast. The river of steel flowed. One famous story sums up the chaos perfectly. A Red Ball driver arriving at a forward dump near Verdun was stopped by a frantic MP. "You can't go down that road," the MP shouted. "The Germans still hold that town." The driver, eyes red from lack of sleep, leaned out of his cab. "I don't care who holds it," he yelled back. "My orders are to deliver this gas to the 4th Armored Division, and unless those Germans want to sign for it, they better get out of my way." He shifted gears and drove into the smoke. That was the spirit of the Red Ball. It was a chaotic, rule-breaking, dangerous mess, but it was the only thing keeping the war moving. By mid-November 1944, the Red Ball Express was dying of exhaustion. The trucks were scrap metal. Their engines, designed for short tactical hauls, had been run at redline speeds for 83 straight days. The tires were shredded, the axles snapped, and the frames bent under the weight of constant overloading. The drivers were walking zombies, men who had forgotten what a full night's sleep felt like, their eyes permanently bloodshot from staring into the rain and darkness. But they had done the impossible. When the operation officially ended on November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express had delivered over 412,000 tons of supplies. They had transported enough fuel to drive a car around the world 1,000 times. They had moved entire infantry divisions, evacuated thousands of wounded, and most importantly, they had kept the guns firing. The end came not because they failed, but because they had succeeded too well. The Allied armies had finally captured the great port of Antwerp in Belgium. With a deep water port close to the front lines, the desperate 400-mile trucking loop from Normandy was no longer needed. The river of steel could finally stop flowing. But as the engines were turned off for the last time, the silence revealed a truth that was uncomfortable for many in the United States Army. The Red Ball Express had been a triumph of African-American competence in the face of systemic racism. For 3 months, the 23,000 men of the Red Ball, 75% of them black, had performed a miracle. They had done so while serving in an army that segregated their blood plasma, forced them to sit in the back of movie theaters, and often treated German prisoners of war with more respect than its own black soldiers. The drivers had shattered every stereotype the military leadership held. They weren't slow or cowardly or unskilled, as the prejudiced reports of the time suggested. They were masters of logistics. They were fearless under fire. They were ingenious mechanics who kept broken trucks running with baling wire and prayer. General George S. Patton, a man who had little patience for incompetence, knew exactly who had saved his Third Army. In a rare moment of candor, he told a visiting general, "My men can eat their belts, but my tanks have got to have gas." He knew that without the black drivers of the Quartermaster Corps, his tanks would still be sitting in the mud of Normandy. General Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander, went further. In a report to Washington, he wrote that without the magnificent performance of the supply drivers, the lightning advance across France would have been fantastic and impossible. The legacy of the Red Ball Express extended far beyond the battlefield. It planted a seed. The undeniable excellence of these segregated units made the argument for segregation impossible to sustain. When the Red Ball veterans returned home, they carried with them the pride of men who knew they had been the lifeline of the free world. They had tasted equality in the liberated villages of France, where the locals cheered them as heroes, not as colored troops. 4 years later, in 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9881, officially desegregating the U.S. Armed Forces. It was a political decision, yes, but it was paved by the asphalt of the Red Ball Express. The integration of the American military and later American society began in the cabs of those GMC trucks, driven by men who refused to let their country lose a war, even if their country didn't fully accept them. The Red Ball Express was more than just a logistical operation. It was the artery that bled the Wehrmacht dry. It proved that the Blitzkrieg could be beaten not just by tanks and airplanes, but by the sheer, relentless will of men driving through the night, fueling the fires of victory, one jerry can at a time. The highway is gone now, buried under modern French interstates, but the roar of those engines still echoes as the sound